People ask me, Philip, and I'm going to ask you to start. So you got confessions of about family relationships. You got a biography. You got salmon, and now you've got river. What runs through your four books? I mean, clearly, with your other writing, you're a person who's very interested in the relationship between people and place. But those four books seem quite different.
Yeah, well, I think it's probably in part the curiosity of the journalist, right? You get interested in subject matters and you pursue them at various times of your life, Um, the I certainly have always had a connection to place as well, and connection to. I always say I've connect my connection to New Brunswick. It's like stubborn, fierce connection to this place, and I've I've been thinking about writing about the Restigouche for a long time, and it's one of those things that subjects that you want to make sure you've put in your hours before you can actually write about it with a certain measure of authority. And so really it's just years of exploration up there, and years of realizing that the best days of my summers and the best days of my year generally are spent up there on those waters. And I felt like it was time to try to say something about that, and to try to find the words to say something about that.
Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with the Restigouche as it relates to canoe, or can you even pull a canoe separately out of it?
Well, I think one of the things that changed for me for many years, my trips to the Restigouche were based around fishing, and so we go up in big Sharp canoes. They're made by a family called Sharp. They're 26-foot heavy canoes that are run with outboard motors, and you can stand. We always say you could stand on the gunnels and cast a fly line. One of those incredibly stable, remarkable boats. And I, when I got a different canoe that I could travel by pole, it really changed things for me in terms of running the river and running it in silence, and being more intimately connected, I think, to the flow of the water and the way that the canoe connects with the flow of the water, being able to see the flow more clearly, to be able to see more things underneath the boat. You could see fish. So there's something. I think things changed a lot for me there. I always say once you start poling a canoe, you'll never go back to paddling. It You have just such great sight lines from the poling position, and also a lot of control. So you can run my polling canoe is 22 feet long, and I can maneuver that and handle it myself easily. And that was a real awakening for me. And
Another thing that I really liked about Restigouche was how you kind of wrote into that story. It was more about relationships between and amongst people than it was about saying, well, here's the indigenous view of the river, and here's the fisher's view of the river, and here's the logger's view of the river. As the museum tries to bring the voices and experiences and the story of the indigenous people from whom the craft and the collection originated, I suspect, and I know there are lessons that you have learned in the process of coming to know the Restigouche and perhaps other rivers as well about those kind of issues.
yeah, that was really the most challenging part of the book for me, was to find a way to write about the Mi'kmaq people and the Mi'kmaq experience in a way that was. I wasn't trying to tell their story for them. They are doing a fine job of telling that story themselves. So I didn't want to assume that I was, passing on their wisdom or their understanding, but I wanted to pass on authentically and honestly their experience, what they've lost and what they've done to begin to the process, and I think it's still ongoing to reclaim some of what they've lost. And also the assumption that there's kind of the narrative that the the salmon fisherman, the noble salmon fisherman, was a kind of a benevolent newcomer to the river, is really is quite an extravagant myth, really. And they certainly have, and that's not to take away the fact that they've loved those waters and used those waters, but the fact that was somehow good for the Mi'kmaq and good for the local people of the valley, the other people that lived in the valley, it is a myth. I think that that it's been a lot. There's a long history there that's a lot more complicated than the more simple narratives that we've been told. The other thing I tried to do was to at least give us a glimpse into some of the work of these extraordinary people who traveled on the river in the earlier days, and some of the Mi'kmaq guides that were, the kind of work that they did on the river, I couldn't imagine being able to physically do or have the craft to do. To pull a birch bark canoe from the tidewater really up into the headwaters of the river upstream with gear and anglers in tow, repairing canoes along the way, making shelters. These were remarkable river people with remarkable skills, really. And there are still guides on the Mi'kmaq guides on the river that I met that are working. These are people that have extraordinary river skills. They know that river in ways that I don't understand. So it was challenging, and it was also very it meant a lot to me to go into that world and to learn about a lot of things that I didn't know.
Well, as a writer, what are you hoping that readers will take or do from your work?
Well, my goal really was to try to use the Restigouche in a sense as a little picture to try to explore larger ideas about our relationship with nature and the natural world. And I'm hoping that will allow people to think about how we relate to nature really on a daily basis, and the kinds of compromises that we make without thinking. So we always, we keep talking about trade-offs that we make, and they're always so short-term in the longer scheme of time, right? If you think about the changes that have taken place to that in that river valley and the river system, they're really recent, and they're entirely experimental in the sense that we don't know what the consequences of our actions are. And so we plunge headlong into these decisions, and we don't necessarily think, what could the consequences of that be? And we've seen, declining numbers in, for example, in salmon runs. We've seen climate change, the effects of climate change in the valley. We know that there's long-term effects of, on logging and from logging and timber harvesting. So much of that complex natural system, the relationship between land and water is really mysterious to us, and we don't know really where all this is going. So I'd like people to think more deeply about that. That would be at least one thing I'd like people to take away from this, that we have a complex relationship with nature, and there's so much that we don't know in the long history of these natural processes. They're mysterious, they're marvelous. We should spend more time marveling at these extraordinary natural beauties rather than saying, well, we need to create this many jobs and cut this much forest. to make sure that, things work out in the next 5 years or something like that, right?
What's your sense of how people are doing with picking up that idea?
Well, it certainly had me thinking more about a lot of these issues. For example, the things that we've taken for granted, like creating resiliency in communities, having a kind of sensible relationship with place and community. All of these things, I think, are things that we certainly think about. And we certainly know, broadly speaking, that pandemics and these disruptions originate really from our disruptions of natural processes in the natural world. And I think we do need to think about this. If we clear cut a section of forest, do we really know what that means in the longer term? It certainly had me thinking about this. And I think that we do need a hard reevaluation of the way that we live. And it's maybe it's a more of a metaphor than anything, but if you think about yourself and your relationship to the canoe, and when you're on the river or a lake and you fall into that kind of slow time where things slow down and you're suddenly more intimately connected with the natural world, I think that there's lessons to be learned in that there's times in the modern world where we just feel like we are kind of caught up in this, stream of progress, and that maybe we need just to slow things down a little bit and live a little bit more deliberately. I do think that there's a lot to be learned from falling out of that time. And I talk in the book about river time, when you disconnect even from your watch from time, and you're following the movements of the day and the currents, and you get where you're going to get based on how the water's flowing, how much headwind you have, how much, and whether you just decide that maybe you want to stop. I mean, that's one of the things I always love about our summer trips, is that when we just decide we want to stop, we just stop. And then we start whenever we feel like starting again. You stop and have a swim, have a nap, read a book, cast a line, whatever. It doesn't, and there's something wonderful about being able to do that.
So if I take one of Professor Lee's or sign up for your courses at St. Thomas, and I want to be a communicator and a journalist, can I do that without you impelling me at some point to get in a river, in a canoe, somehow attached to nature, or can I do it strictly as a parliamentary bureau sort of person?
Well, you could do both ways, but I do want to do a course, and I'm talking to a good friend of mine to do a course on nature writing. And we are definitely going to do that. And as part of that, we would like to get people out, and writing about, students out writing about nature, either going on hikes or going on canoe runs. And there's some really important nature writing out there. I teach in a great books program here as well as journalism. And we did an essay by Annie Dillard called Seeing. It was really about how we learn to see the world of nature, and really how you develop your ability to see more than you would first see. This is an oversimplification, but the experience of the first time you would go down into a river, let's say, you would see it one way, but the 10th time you went, you would see an entirely different scene, because you become experienced at knowing what you're seeing. The depth of your seeing grows through your experience and becomes more profound. And that's really what she's talking about. And I think that is something that I'm trying to work at, is to learn to be better at seeing what I'm seeing when I'm out in the world and on the river. I had this experience this last year. I was on the Nashwauk River, which is a tributary that flows into the St. John. Like, I'm looking out my window here. It's like almost right across the river from my house. And the Nashwauk's a beautiful little small river. And I was up there just messing around one day in the spring, and I was seeing these shad coming up by my
Well, you
canoe.
described that in a blog or
Yeah, I mentioned that in the blog. It was
yeah.
so I'm watching these shad go by, and I'm just anchored there, and then all of a sudden, like a shoal of these fish, like hundreds of them, come up over this shallow bar. Like, it was like a wave of fish in fins. I've never seen anything like it. And then they just went into a kind of frenzy of spawning all around me. I just sat there in my canoe watching this, and I thought, that is like, it was just amazing. I couldn't believe, and I've been up there many times, but I just happened to be in the right place at the right time when this just shoal of fish came up. And I thought, well, that's good for the Nashwauk, because obviously it's healthy enough that these fish had migrated from the ocean in there. Then I went up the next day, and it was to see if they were still around, and they were gone. So it was a moment in time. And it's sort of, for me now, it's like being out and seeing something like that I get as much out of that as, as hooking fish, and trying to learn to be better at that than the pursuit of, I'm going to, go and get this fishing trip done, or I'm going to go and get this canoe trip done. And, just like, you want to get in there and just be there. And then things happen that you might not expect. And I don't know, I mean, I've lived in other places, but I've always kind of come back to New Brunswick. I think it's one of the best kept secrets of, Canadian provinces in many ways. There's just a lot of natural beauty on the coastlines. And then we have some great rivers. I mean, we've got the Restigouche, which is extraordinary. And then the Miramichi is an absolutely extraordinary watershed. And I have spent a lot of time exploring the Miramichi River over the years, and it is absolutely incredible. And Miramichi Bay is this extraordinary bay system, and then we have beaches along the coastlines and the Fundy Coast. There's just a lot of beautiful water and beautiful territory.
It's quite a few years ago now, but I got a call from the EA of a New Brunswick Minister of Economic Development and Tourism, Francis somebody, but he'd figured out that an awful lot of people come to New Brunswick with a holiday frame of mind and a pocket full of money. And one of his ideas was he wanted to put at Edmundston there at the border and at Ellis, and he wanted to put up a big sign with Anne of Green Gables on it that said, welcome to Nova Scotia, so that people would think they were there. But anyway, he got the idea that he could do a day adventure program, and he wanted to get operators in New Brunswick to provide food and activity that would have something to do with engaging with the beauties of New Brunswick. And I was absolutely shocked that when it came time to start looking for canoe guides for New Brunswick, there just weren't any. They're not that I could find. And it was almost like somebody in New Brunswick, or New Brunswick generally, had this incredible secret that they didn't want to tell anybody else about. Is that a fair assessment, or was it the salmon fishers who said, yeah, these are our rivers. We don't want canoeists.
Well, that has certainly been an issue in the north, and on the Restigouche in particular, and that, I think, is changing and needs to change further. It certainly has changed, but the idea that if someone's fishing for salmon in a canoe, and a group of canoeists come down the river, that's somehow a massive inconvenience, and it is somehow wrong. That has to end, and it has ended. It is ending, but there needs to be certainly more understanding of the sharing of the river. There is a kind of strange culture of like, if you don't know how to get there, nobody's going to like make it easy for you down here, right? And I've long thought that we should be, printing maps. We should be, marking roads, telling people how to get in and out of rivers. And even on the Restigouche, there it can be difficult to get in and out. There's only a few access points. So yeah, it is an issue. And if you think about the history of the canoe in this province, the history of the chestnut canoe factory, and I think we could do more to celebrate that and more to and make more of that. I think one thing that we are working on, the province of New Brunswick and some very dedicated people, is the idea of creating this Restigouche Wilderness Waterway Park, which would be a linear park that would open up that river but maintain its wilderness qualities. And I think that I'm hoping that's going to happen, and I think it will, and that will make a difference. So you could go up there and have a place to go to find out how to get in and out of the river, and have that kind of information that you need.
We're delighted to have you as a Brunswicker on the National Council of the Canoe Museum for many, many reasons, not least the great canoeing traditions of New Brunswick. And of course, chestnut is part of that. But I saw in one of your earlier blogs, you'd written about Bill Miller. Did you know him personally?
I don't know him well. I've certainly met him, and he made my canoe, and I'd had correspondence with him before we bought the canoe because I wanted to talk to him. I bought the canoe from someone who had bought it from him before. And so we went around to his place and he had a look at it and laid hands on it, and showed me the mold that he built the canoe on. And I mean, sadly, somebody will pick up those molds and hopefully carry on that tradition. But his canoes are very different from any other New Brunswick canoes. They're very different from chestnut canoes. And I've owned chestnut canoes in the past, and they're great canoes. But these Miller canoes, the one that I have it's flat bottomed and has a very low profile on the water. So it's a different beast. It was funny when I talked to him first about it. Was talking about various things, and I said, what horsepower motor could I put on this? Because it's a flat back and 22-foot canoe. And he said, it's really made for one person power. He said, that canoe is designed to run with one person and a pole. That's the design. So it operates in the water as it should, as a poling canoe. But, Bill Miller, gentle man, and had this tradition of every spring he would run fiddlers down the Tobic River on canoes, which was a great tradition. And he was more interested in that than building canoes later in his career. He said, well, you need to put this canoe in the Tobic River and go from the Forks to Riley Brook, because it needs to be christened in the Tobic River. And I said, well, we don't have any way of getting, I said, how would we get he said, I'll drive you to the Forks and then I'll take your car down to Riley Brook. And I said, well, how would you get home? He said, well, I'll just hitchhike back to my house from Riley Brook. And I said, no, I can't impose on you like that. So anyway, we said goodbye. We went down to Riley Brook and we were having lunch, and the owner of the diner where we were eating said, you need to put that canoe in the Tobic River. He said, I'll drive you to the Forks and then I'll drive your car back down here and leave it for you. So my daughter and I said we couldn't refuse the second offer. So we said, sure. So we went up and put the canoe in the Forks. I just had a pole, I think. I had gotten a pole from Bill Miller, actually. So I just had the pole and my daughter was in the front. Had a grand float down to Riley Brook. But as we were poling off from the Forks, my daughter said, you just gave our car and trailer to a stranger.
Total stranger.
And I said, yeah, you're right. It's exactly what we did. But the car was waiting for us, but that's kind of the way it is up there. And he's from, shop is in Nicktaw, and it wouldn't have been a big deal for him probably to hitchhike back home. But
I mean, the reason for creating the National Council is to have firsthand experience of the canoeing traditions of the country in the voices of the people who live there. And so that was one of the initiatives to create the council, to bring those voices in. And this series, In Conversation, is a way to bring those alive during the pandemic. If I say canoe, Philip, what does the word mean?
I mean, I think what it would mean to me and to a lot of the people that I know that are canoe people is, I think in a sense, it's a passageway to worlds that we would not be able to encounter without them. The places that we go in our canoes are places that we could not go otherwise. I mean, the things that we are able to see in our canoes, we could not see without them. And that would include some of the experiences I've had, for example, even fishing on the Restigouche, that there is only one way to get to the places that we get to and to do the things we do. And that's with the kinds of canoes that have been built precisely for these places that they go. I mean, they're designed to travel on those specific waters. And I think of canoes in other parts of the world and other parts of Canada. And I think one of the interesting things about them, and I'm sure, and I know you're deeply aware of this at the museum, and is that they are designed for, they do have a connection to place. And they are designed to go to specific places. And they're these extraordinary technological vessels that are made precisely to take us to these places where we wouldn't otherwise be able to go. There's no other way to get there. Bill Miller used to tell me about a canoe that was designed for the Serpentine River, which is a tributary of the Tobic, that was designed, the width was designed to pass through the rocks passages on the Serpentine River. He said that canoe was specifically designed to navigate that river. And I do think that, and Restigouche canoes are very much the same, that they're designed to be, travel in very shallow water and to navigate those shallow bars, and to be able to do that, and also to be able to be used as stable fishing platforms. So I do think of that, and the the type of and the technology of a canoe is just, it's simple, but it really can't be, in many ways, can't be improved upon, right? It's like, it is what it is, right? Something kind of lovely about that. There's not going to be a new design of canoe that's going to improve on the design of the canoe that I love. That canoe is, you could not improve upon it. Here's my one technological improvement that I have now, and I'm very happy about this, is that there's a friend of mine in Kedrick River who makes paddles named Remy Bergeron. His company's called Wagansis, which is named for this old portage route at the headwaters of the Restigouche. And I wanted a long paddle. Like, so when I was poling and then I would get into deep water, I just wanted to be able to put the pole down and paddle, but not have to sit down. So I thought, this is a great innovation, right? And then Remy found a chestnut paddle called the Guides paddle. You probably may have seen this. You probably have one in the museum, I don't know. But again, it's a long paddle that was absolutely used by a poling guide who wanted a paddle. So he's making another one for me this winter that's really modeled off this chestnut guides paddle. So I think it's a little longer than in total length than 7 feet. And it's the prototype that I was using at the end of last season. I mean, I just love it. So you just have that sitting on top of your load there. And then when you get into deep water, or even want a little break from the push of the pole, you can just put your pole down and pick up that long paddle, right? And use it as a rudder or whatever. But the chestnut factory was long ago all over this. So I thought that we were onto something sort of innovative here, but it's, yeah.
You will have read Roger McGregor's When the Chestnut Was in Flower,
Yeah.
which makes the claim that the Chestnut brothers were really technological pirates, and that they got their beautiful original shape from E.M. White or somebody in Vesey, Maine. Is that a fair thing to say to a New Brunswick canoeophile?
I would say that could be, but we need to remember what the original designs were coming from in the first place, and they were all
true.
on the Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqey in New Brunswick, at least the Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqey designs, and it's interesting that the Wolastoqey canoes and Mi'kmaq canoes are very different. If you look at old photographs and whatnot, you can absolutely see the difference in the design. For the Restigouche and northern canoes, where the Mi'kmaq canoes were being made, there's certainly higher gunnels, higher bow and stern, because you're in choppier, heavier waves and whatnot, and out in Chaleur Bay and in the valley of the St. John River, there are these absolutely low profile, lighter canoes, and they're and I think that certainly the design that was picked up of my canoe is more Wolastoqey in origin, and it wasn't actually designed again by Bill Miller's family. It was designed by this man named guide up there named Burton Moore, who built it. He called it the Guide Special. He made the mold and then sold it to Bill Miller's father, but that's the original. So if we want to fight over Maine or New Brunswick, we probably should go back to, be thinking that these designs were all lifted from Passamaquoddy, Wolastoqey, Mi'kmaq people who for, thousands of years had designed technologically perfect vessels for these rivers.
What a splendid answer. It makes me think, I've only been on one bark canoe trip in my life, and it was in Saskatchewan with a guy who was chasing his dad, who taught it or created a day school at Pelican Narrows. Interesting guy. And he built a bark canoe to follow his dad's trail, and I was sort of there as a companion and I don't know what, but we stopped often to repair the canoe, of course, and we had a bit of bear fat and we had a bit of pitch, but we very quickly, all the pitch we went through. And so on a 3-week trip from Larange down the Deschambault River and back up the Churchill, we had all along the way pitch from the trees all along the way. And at the end of it, my companion, who's a very interesting, creative guy, his name's Bill Buxton. He's also on the National Council. He said, Jimmy, when you take a big holiday at family station wagon, you get a sticker at Magnetic Hill, you get one, and you stick them across the back of the car. He said, because we've taken pitch from trees all along the route, it's like we have the DNA of our route on our canoe. I thought, wow.
That's great. That's a wonderful one. Yeah.
And to think, as you have said, that is still the most appropriate means of conveyance in a lot of these places. Listen, Philip, I don't want to keep you for a long time, but it's been wonderful. Where are you going now with your next book? Is something gelled, or are you thinking about water, or what are you working, or something completely different?
I don't know. You know what it's like about when you finish a book, I'm always like, that's the last time I'm ever gonna do one of those. But I I've been thinking about a number of things. I may do something about the St. John River because I think that I would like to do something about that. The St. John River, maybe the Grand Lake Meadows, and maybe something about. I feel like there's something to be said there. It's a bit of a heartbreaker of a story for me, but it would be, you know, we've got 3 dams on this river, and they've been, it's been a real tragedy for the river. And I think there's some things that could be said there. So it's been a pleasure talking to you about the situation, but I certainly look forward to being able to travel again and, you know, get out to see you, and you're certainly welcome anytime to come here, and we can do a trip once we get organized back into normal life.
Well, I'd love to come and just, yeah, just do something, wet a line if possible, but even just to go for a wander somewhere would be lovely. And I'll hang on to your invitation, and I may pound on your door.
Well, I certainly love guiding people around and showing people the places that we, you know, some of the places that we can go, and you know, it would be a pleasure to do that.